Well, good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Tim here for our third Thursday. It's a tricky one to remember. Just give folks another minute or two here to kind of get logged in and set to go. As we're doing that and waiting for people to get joined up here, very excited to be with everyone today. And for those of you who aren't able to make it here, I am recording it. So we will send the recording out hereafter. And it didn't seem that we had anybody who registered some consultation requests for today, which is fine. So I might go a little bit longer than the half hour if I really get going here on one of my favorite topics today, which is psychological values. You will notice a few things missing today. One is the voice of Dr. Casey Lankow, and he is, I'm sure he would be fine with me telling all of you this, but he is closing on a new house today. So we wish him all the best. And for those of you who are familiar with, I think it's Mo's, we'll have to ask Martha, Master Martha and Dr. Lisa to correct me on that one, but the Mo's stress scale, Mo's might be actually the scale which you test for the hardness of rocks. Holmes-Ray is the stress scale, I think. Very different thing, Mo's and Holmes-Ray. But anyway, buying a house has actually ranked now at the top of the list of most stressful life events. It actually outpaces even self-report, even going through divorce. So hopefully buying a house is a little bit more fulfilling process. But anyway, probably more than people wanted to know, but that's what we're here for. So I'd like to start today talking about psychological values. And you can see here I have my screen shared. And I'm here at the dashboard in the WSQ-Discovery results section. And for those of you who haven't been in here, it's a great place to go to get reports. But I'm going to actually pull up my Discovery Facilitator report and kind of talk through the psychological values from a self-disclosure perspective. And there's a reason that we do that when we're doing interpretation with people. But here, so I'm going to generate the facilitator report. Very nice. It's coming up here. So I will be scrolling down. So for those of you here on this page, a little refresher on personality system psychology. It's really the integration of three sort of main schools or theories or lenses with which we understand personality. First one being trait theory, and big five factors of personality, or big five traits, really look at an individual from what I might think of as kind of more the upper crust, the more accessible, the more general patterns of behaving in most contexts, and what that kind of looks like. And that's very helpful. Then we get a little bit deeper down in the iceberg, still in the personality realm, and we start to get into things like cognitive affective psychology, self-concept, how we form and understand relationships. And this really all comes out of self-psychology. So that was a movement in the 60s where it was really looking at the self and the capital S self. And one thing that really separates humans, or at least we think, from all other living beings is the capacity for what's called metacognition, or thinking about thinking. And that's really an important thing in that we can start to see ourselves and think about ourselves. So we can reflect, we can have thoughts about our identity, who we are, et cetera, et cetera. And what's really helpful with self-psychology, or helpful to understand through self-psychology, is that we all tell ourselves stories about ourselves. And those particular stories that we tell ourselves are very unique to us. So that's one way that we're completely different from all other humans, is that the kind of story I tell myself about myself is wholly unique to me. And what's really interesting and cool in how these three lenses of psychology or personality are sewn together is that it's really from our psychological needs or values, which we're going to be exploring today. It's really from that place, that deeper place, that my story of myself emerges. And from those two places, my psychological values and my needs, which we're going to get into, and my self-concept, from those two places, my traits are expressed unique to me. So we might have two people who are exactly the same on extroversion. And by and large, when all things are the same, they're going to act relatively similar to one another. However, when circumstances change, right, or when we're in a new place, a new setting, those two extroverted people might behave wildly differently from one another. And it's not because one changed on extroversion or not, but it's because what they were interpreting in their environment, they might be looking at the same thing, but they're having a very different interpretation. So Freud called this projection, which is a fine word to use to understand this, but it's really the meaning that I'm making of a situation. And the meaning that I make of a situation and how I'm in it is really uniquely tied to who I am, my experiences, and what needs I feel I have in the moment. Excuse me, what needs I feel I have about myself and how they're being seen in this moment. So a little bit about Henry Murray, Harvard psychologist. He developed what's called the thematic apperception test, the TAT, and he did this in the 30s and 40s. And he had a colleague who had a child that was homesick for a few days. And this colleague, she stayed home with her child and noticed that he was telling wildly entertaining stories about the room that he was in, and kind of making things up. And it was really a way for him to kind of pass the time. But as she listened to him talk about it and kind of looked at the room that he was in and the toys he was playing with, she realized that had she been asked to come up with stories about this and kind of make some stories up, she would have made up very different stories than he did. So that got her thinking, okay, what's kind of in there, right? What's in her son's brain that isn't in her brain, right? So she brought this back to Murray and thought there might be a chance if they could sort of standardize this procedure, which is really making it safe for people to talk about their projections. If they could standardize a procedure in a way for people to be able to do that, they might be able to gain some insight into the individual's mind or way that they are showing up or being in the world or seeing the world, and how that might be different from other people's views. So they set about for around a decade of coming up with series A, B, C, and D of the TAT slides. And if you're familiar with them at all, let's see, maybe I could find one. TAT slides, not slide share. Here's one. So here's a classic one, or one, they're all classic, I suppose, at this point. We can kind of zoom in here. Oh dear. Let's go back. Just want the pictures, guys. This is when everyone wishes Casey were here. Okay, here's one, very cool. Ooh, look at it. So fascinating. Oh, for goodness sakes. We'll just zoom in here like this. So here's a slide. And so what the psychologist would be doing here is showing this slide to a client. And it's not to diagnose or to come up with a label or to look for any specific answers. It's not useful in that way. But what this is useful for is the psychologist shows the client this picture and says, tell me as rich in detail a story as you can think of about this picture. Okay? Tell me as rich in detail of the story that you can think of about this picture. And you will notice that there are some images in here. There's clearly some, what I might think I would call two men in the background, and it looks like one of them has a knife and might be operating on this other man laying down. But then you also see this other, I think, male figure in the foreground, and it looks like a younger person. So then you see a shotgun. So it's really kind of a lot of imagery here, right? So there's some cues and things for people to sort of pick up on. But the stories that people will tell just about this slide are so fascinating and so rich, and they're all really helpful in revealing what are this person's kind of underlying projections. And so let's start to get this into what the heck does this have to do with psychological values. And so imagine a client here, right? Might be a boy, or a client might be sitting in front of you. This could be a coaching client, whatever. I mean, we're not diagnosing and we're not billing insurance here, but imagine somebody say, well, there's a boy in the front, and that boy is looking away, and he has a father who is laying down on the table. And there's a doctor in the background and the doctor's assistant, and they're performing an emergency surgery on the father. And perhaps the father had accidentally shot himself, and they're taking the bullet out, right? And this boy is feeling like he might be all alone now, or this boy is worried about his future. The boy doesn't want to know any of the details here because he's looking away, all right? And the boy is feeling tremendously isolated, and he doesn't have anyone else in his support network. So you can see here that if someone were saying this, you can hear all of the interpretations as an example, that it's a father-son, that there's a relationship there, that he's worried about the future, that he might not want to look at all the details, okay? So what's happening for somebody who would be giving this kind of response, right? What's being revealed ultimately are that person's sort of psychological needs. And a psychological need, or what we call in discovery a psychological value, is a sense or a notion about how the world is and how I fit in the world. And when it's congruent, then I have a sense that I'm whole, that my identity is intact, that I feel secure, okay? So when you think about psychological needs or psychological values, as we call them, same thing, more approachable term is a value than a need, but you can conceptually use them interchangeably. When you think about needs, you need to think about sense of security and sense of identity. And how does this person in front of me, or that I'm doing a feedback call with, how are they making meaning of how they are in this world, okay? So it really ties to both sense of significance and purpose. And you'll hear us talk about this a lot, these two concepts, but significance is fulfilling or completing a phrase, I matter. Who I am matters, right? So when I feel that I have significance in my life, I feel that I matter, me. When I have purpose in my life, what I do matters. So when you're doing feedback calls with people, even in a professional setting, significance and purpose are really the two things you want to be listening for. And the psychological values section of Discovery is really where you're going to get some insight into some of these notions that they have about what they need in order to feel that they have significance and feel that they have purpose. Significance, I matter. Purpose, what I do matters. So we're going to scroll here through the report, and we're going to go down to the psychological values. And remember, I started this by saying, I'm going to show you mine. And when we're talking to people on this level, really down kind of deep in, there's often a sense of reticence to even go there. And that's understandable. And one way to help people go there is to talk about it in a helpful way. Find a connection and say, I'm high on this scale too, and this is what I've learned about myself, and this is how it's really good. So remember, left side, right side, neither are good, neither are all good, neither are all bad. So there's good things in all of these scales. So whether you're the left side or the right side. So it isn't about right or wrong, but it just is, and it's about discovering how this information can help people be their best self. So here we have 5 sort of core psychological values or psychological needs. And these really come out of Murray's system of needs, which I kind of abruptly left the picture of the TAT, but what he did in terms of how to sort of codify or score the TAT is he started to realize that while the content was a little different, people did talk about kind of similar things in terms of categories. So he developed a whole category or what he calls his system of needs. And these 5 psychological values on Discovery really are quite related to a lot of the work that Murray did. Now, obviously, we are measuring it in a different way than he is, but what our instrument is able to do is kind of give a picture of what are some of the needs that people have. So the first one here is values information. So remember, again, we're talking about psychological values equate to identity, right? And equate to significance and purpose, okay? So values information is more than just a personality trait of paying attention to details. Values information, if you're quite high on this, very far to the right, it actually becomes distressing, oftentimes on a felt level, when someone doesn't have the information they feel that they need. So it's not about skepticism, it's not about details, but it's just about, I believe I need this information to feel comfortable and feel that this story that I have about the world makes sense, right? So you could explore that with a client or a coachee or someone by asking them what's it like when you've wanted information, you haven't gotten it. And let them tell you the story, right? So this is just the beginning point for helping understand them. So values information, okay? It's distressing when information isn't given to me. Now, what's really interesting too about this is that it kind of leads to a sense of not wanting to make decisions hastily, right? Or feeling uncomfortable making a decision without having some outside data, right? So there might be, for some people, a sense that they don't necessarily trust their own intuition, but some other people might trust their intuition and value information. So it's not a certain has to be one way or the other, but valuing information and security and identity. So if we go to the left side of it, accepts inexactness, it's almost the flip. It's that this information that's outside of me, I don't really need to have it in order to feel secure. So I can kind of make my way through life, and I don't, feel that I have to go get information in order to be kind of secure and whole. So you'll see here for me, I'm actually on this level, when it's the combined score, I'm at the 54th percentile on accepts inexactness. So I'm pretty much right down the middle. Actually don't value information a whole lot on the combined level. When we get to the expressed and underlying, you'll really see sort of the psychodynamic aspect that plays out for me, and I'll share that for people. But I value information about the same as everyone else, and prefer it sometimes, and don't need a whole lot of it to feel all that secure. Moving on, values connection. Values connection is really needing to feel connected to other people. And when someone is not feeling connected to other people and they're this high, it gets unsettling. So being a loner could be something that I would never want to be. But if you're really high in connection, kind of like I am, feeling a part of a group or a team or a family is really a key piece of how I form my own identity and how I see the world and how I try to act on my world to get that kind of need met. So far to the other side, low affiliation, somebody doesn't necessarily need to have that sense of being a part of a group, a family, a team, a close-knit group. Low affiliation means I don't have that need, right? It doesn't mean that I'm incapable of forming relationships. It doesn't mean that I don't want to. People can be far to the left on low affiliation and have very rich relationships. It's just less of their narrative of how their world makes sense to them. So we go to ambition, and again, what's my narrative of how my world makes sense to me? And having a sense of accomplishing and being accomplished and getting somewhere, that is a big part of my narrative that I kind of work out in my doings, so to speak. So what's helpful here is that I can be aware of these two pretty prominent needs or values, and I can start to think about different situations and go, other people might see this same situation from a different point of view, right? So I can be aware that I project onto situations, right, two really prominent needs. One is this sense of being connected or not, and the other one is, are we going somewhere? Are we winning, right? And so I might interpret normal team dysfunction, right, as through this lens. Well, they don't want to be a part of it here, or they're not committed to winning. When in fact, other people on a team, and we might be having some challenges, might be seeing something very different, same situation from a very different lens, right? So it's helpful in the sense of, what might I be projecting onto this situation, or what interpretations might I be making about a particular situation? So then I go down to values acknowledgement, and that's really getting recognition for who you are, for what you do, and feeling that encouragement and support and acknowledgement is kind of a big part of somebody's narrative if they're really high on it, right? If you go far over to self-validating, it's that they don't necessarily look for, project onto a situation or make an interpretation around getting acknowledgement, right? So if they don't get acknowledgement, they're more capable of providing their own validation of themselves. So again, if you're on the left side, it doesn't mean that you can't receive acknowledgement or that it doesn't feel good when you get it. It just means that that particular need is not really a prominent aspect of the projections you're making of your situation. So then lastly, we get down to value certainty. And if you saw one of our Psychology at Work shorts, we did certainty and information together, because often people think they kind of interchange one with the other. But information is simply just needing to have access to and to gain information as part of making sense of your world. So you kind of need the information. Certainty isn't so much about the volume of information about what's going to happen, but it's the sense of certainty around what is going to happen. So value certainty, if somebody's really high on value certainty, they need to have a felt sense that that they know what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next. And it's a deeper sense than conscientiousness traits around dutifulness and predictability and following routines. Value certainty is really, on a deep level, a sense of security is obtained from a felt sense that things are going to stay the same. So the far left side on accepts ambiguity, that side is, I don't need to have certainty as part of, it's not a prominent part of my projective story that I'm telling about the world, right? So far to the left accepts ambiguity, part of their projective story that they might be telling themselves about the world is that the only guarantee is that there are no guarantees, or what is it? Death and taxes are the only two guarantees. But that change will happen, and not just change, but something in the future is going to happen that I can't predict. And I just kind of sit with it, and it doesn't really rile me up. So that's kind of the 5 values as we talk through it. What we really find, though, is, let's see if I can do this too. I'm going to generate this thing again. So here are my combined score psychological values. And you can get a sense from me, you know, if you know me, which all of you do, you could probably have some pretty good guesses about how I am kind of projecting onto situations, and I'm really looking at connection and winning, or ambition. And probably more than I even realize without seeing this data is that I'm really thinking about how are we winning, and are we feeling like a team. Now, if you start to put some of this information together, so hold on to this identity projection. Big part of my narrative of how I make sense of the world is feeling connected to a close-knit group of people and wanting to be, and also that particular group of people is accomplishing something, so that we're winning. I'm part of the winning. We're all doing really well. We're succeeding. We feel like we're accomplishing stuff. Okay. So then let's go to my agreeableness. Skeptical, 99th percentile. Concern for self. So this doesn't mean that I'm incapable of trust or incapable of caring about other people. Actually, my values suggest that I deeply care about other people. But you can see how both my skeptical default and my how is this going to impact me default and my directness, saying this is what I need, and my displayfulness, right, which you've all seen on display, how those things, right, how those low agreeableness things can sometimes get in my way of having this sense of connection, right? Because the way I might behave around certain people might actually lead them to be, I don't know, annoyed with me or feeling like they don't have space in the relationship. And when that happens, there's a conflict. I go right through my lens of values connection, and I go, oh no, I've done something so big that we're never going to have this connection again, right? So again, you can see how it's really helpful to, kind of in your own way, figure out how you can maybe give examples to the client or the person you're working with from your own story or from your own perspective, giving them examples of, you know, how it's okay to kind of own some of this stuff and kind of talk about it from a level of, you know, this is sort of how I default and I'm aware of it and it's a journey. And this is, you know, because I've become aware of it, this is how I've been able to change a few things, right? If you can speak to your person that you're working with from that place, what it does is it gives them permission to go there as well. So you're not doing this to make it about you or for it to be your therapy session, but you're doing it in picking your spots in the sense of you're doing it for them to give them permission to also do it, give them an invitation, right? And so that form of self-disclosure is really used well on the values and self-concept scales. It's also one that we really tend not to do on the traits so much unless someone is needing some permission, because really you want to get the client or the person you're doing this interpretation with to make it about them and to internalize it. So you certainly would not talk about yourself for a whole half hour like I'm doing here, but I'm kind of giving a little bit deeper stuff here on this. So here we are, psychological values on the left, and then you'll see on the right side on page 10 of the report how it's the underlying versus expressed. And what's really neat, so my combined is on the left, and remember, values information, I was kind of down the middle, actually just a titch to the accepting and exactness side, right? And so that's my express, or that's my combined. But if you go over here on the right side, my expressed is still more toward an exactness, but what's underneath, the stuff that I'm not saying out loud, is that I actually do value information quite a bit. So what we can use this for is, again, with this permission piece, the underlying is the part that I probably am not saying out loud very often. And so it may have a tendency to crop up more so when I'm stressed or in conflict, because, again, the underlying stuff, when I'm feeling stressed or in conflict or whatever, I'm going to tend to go into those inner feelings that I haven't really put words to yet and interpret my reality more that way, particularly under stress or in conflict. So it's also going to be harder for me to put words to things that I haven't done yet, so, or to effectively communicate. So it kind of gets manifested in emotion, right? So this is where, when Casey and I get stuck in our own collusion cycles, his accepts and exactness is on the 99th percentile in both expressed and underlying, and we're fine day to day. But if a challenge comes up, my underlying values information goes up, and I start telling stories to myself, probably on the felt level, right? Certainly nothing I'm saying out loud that he's hiding things from me. I start to get into intention of what this other person, this other person's intentions. And I know that when I get to a place where I am spending time in my head thinking about what's going on in anyone else's head, that I'm in self-protection mode. And so one clue here and how these are helpful is when I start telling stories to myself that other people are withholding information from me, that's a clue to me that I'm probably in self-protection mode. So here we see, and whereas when I'm not in self-protection, when I'm not telling those stories, I'm not really thinking about it. So you can see both expressed and underlying values connection are pretty prominent. So there isn't a big change between what I say and what I feel around connection. So I'm probably going to be verbalizing as well as feeling this need for connection. Same with ambition. So those are pretty prominent, consistent needs, both in what I say and how I feel about it. We get down here to values acknowledgement. This is fascinating. So again, if you look on my combined one, I'm at the 57th percentile, not a whole lot. But if you get to the expressed and underlying, what I say is, I don't need a pat on the back. I don't need from external sources validation that I'm whatever, supported, important, that I matter. I might say I can go at this alone. But then I look at the underlying and it's completely the opposite. So I say one thing, but really underneath, I value it quite a bit. So it comes out in the combined score, kind of in the middle, but you see the express versus underlying tells a more complete story. So you can imagine how, or you can think about how that big flip sort of comes into play in relationships and in different contexts, right? I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm validating myself, I am whatever, and then when things get really stressful or overwhelming, I actually don't have a lot of words for it, but I feel a big need to receive some acknowledgement from people, and probably from people that matter to me. So you'll see people who have these flips, and they can be on different sets of scales than acknowledgement. It can happen anywhere. But this is a great spot to give them a little permission to kind of think about it in a different way. So on one hand, you say this, or kind of to the outside world, you express this, but on the other hand, inside, you might be feeling something a little different. Has that ever, can you think of a time that that's ever happened, or that you've gone through that? And then let them fill it in and let them think about it. And here's a great plug for one of the most underutilized but most valuable skills, whether you're coaching, counseling, doing therapy, or even trying to sell. The skill of silence. Just use silence. When you get these flips, think about, okay, ask your question and then sit and do not talk. Count to 20. Because this is probably the first time that that person's ever thought about or been asked a question like this. The likelihood that their very first answer is going to be rich and really revealing is pretty low. But it gives them a chance to think about how they think in a new way. And so you want to open the door up for that and let them walk through it at their own pace. So then we're going to get to value certainty. And this is an interesting one, and it's kind of combines with the values acknowledgement and self-validating in an interesting way, I think. So I say out loud that I need certainty, not a ton, but some. And like, so what I say is we need to make plans, we need to make plans, we need to know that it's going to be okay. I need to really know that it's all going to be okay. But underneath, I'm actually a lot more okay with not knowing exactly how things are going to work out. And that was kind of a revelation for me when I looked at this and talked with some people about it, in that I don't have to have a certain plan to know and to feel that things are going to be okay. I don't have, and I'm actually not going to be given that plan. And to sit with that and go, you know what though, underneath, I really am okay with that. That's a very helpful way of understanding myself as far as kind of what goes on inside and whatnot. So if you're working with me, give me some acknowledgement and tap into your acceptance of ambiguity and give me some information too. So anyway, that's the psychological values. Again, we don't really ever say just look at one scale in isolation or one set of scales, but really to put that in combination with the rest of the report. And how does somebody do that? Well, if you're working with someone around identity, and maybe their professional identity, maybe they've been newly promoted to a different position, moved into a first-time supervisory role, maybe they're going to college, and that's going to be a big change. Maybe they're graduating from college and starting out in work, right? Whatever it is, any kind of change in life or change in a role is going to be a change in identity. And the psychological values scales really give you some great insight into how that person is projecting how this change is going to be for them and what they need in this change, right? So that's going to be different for different people, but change in life, identity changes, psychological values, we start there. Now, when those values aren't being met, or those needs aren't being met, we can start to tell some really amazing stories, I'll use that word, to ourselves about ourselves. And that's where you go up a little bit to the self-concept section. We're not going to get into that today, but you start at values, then when those needs aren't being met, you go up to self-concept scales, which will tell you a little bit of a picture about what stories they might be telling themselves, right? That can layer on and give a great deal of insight into all the stuff that they're saying in their own head. Then you go up to the factor 5 traits, or the emotionality traits, and that's giving you a picture into how they're feeling, what feelings are actually happening inside. So again, I won't get into all this, but you can just see from the picture what happens to me when a certain value or need isn't met. I start to go into, I'm no good at things, right? And I spend quite a bit of time thinking about it. And I'm most likely at that point going to be operating out of my stressful days set of traits. So I get quite self-conscious, become emotionally impulsive. Actually, I stay emotionally impulsive or expressive. So everybody feels what I'm feeling. And sadness, anger, and worry are all present. So that would be, you know, how you can use the psychological value scale. Start there and work your way backwards on the report. So no fancy ending for today. I'll just stop talking. Again, if you have questions or any specific consultation around any of this stuff, We are always here, and we're very delighted to receive phone calls and messages from you all. And for those of you who are able to make it on, thank you very much. And for those of you who are watching this later, thanks for watching. Until next time, when we have Dr. Casey back, and I just got word from him that the closing is over, so he is now a homeowner. Congratulations. Until next time, signing off for the second third Thursday, Dr. Tim. Take care.